I know there have been some studies on this that claim that maybe contraceptives or something, this baby boom or post-war positive attitudes, but the fact that the boom began before the war, basically, and contraceptives cannot explain it either. And if you think that post-war boom would be another thing about against that would be that after World War One there was no population boom. So if you have an explanation, it should possibly work elsewhere too.
Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Richard Smith, and once again here with the Foundation for the Study of Cycles and Cycles TV, and very pleased today to introduce to you all and to me a new contributor, but on a theme that I've really been looking to expand and explore more, which dates back to really the origins of the Foundation as well, which is biological cycles and wildlife biology cycles. And I was corresponding with Neil Howe, author of the Fourth Turning books, and he introduced me to Janne, forgive me for mispronouncing your last name, Miettinen.
Close
Miettinen.
enough.
I should know because I actually have, my wife has some Finnish heritage. So I know a couple of phrases, but I'd be embarrassed to say them. Anyway, Janne, it's great to meet you. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and the work that you'll be sharing with us today and how you got interested and started?
Right. First of all, thanks for the invite, and nice to meet you, Richard.
Oh,
And
thank you.
well, a few things about myself. I live in Finland. First of all, so it's 9 p.m. here right now, getting a little bit darker. And I've been living here for about 15 years. I originally moved here in Eastern Finland. I originally moved here to study at the university and decided to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
And my field of academic studies has been law before this project began.
Mm-hmm. And so this project is on biological cycles.
Right.
And in particular, you've been looking at population cycles.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about how that came about, how you got interested in that field, and how you got on the track that you're on now?
Right. So I've always been interested in the society, looking at it from different angles. I read cycles books about the economy, and I hadn't read cycle books about the society before 2017 when I read about the Strauss-Howe generational theory.
Mm-hmm.
The Fourth Turning was the book. It was released in 97, and that's how I got into this idea of possible cycles affecting societies and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you are also familiar with the Strauss-Howe generational theory.
Yes, absolutely. And I interviewed Neil and a colleague, Ben Hunt, last year on this channel. We did a nice interview, and yeah, Neil's work is of great interest to the Foundation for the Study of Cycles, and it lines up with other cycle analyses. Neil has an interesting generational engine to his cycles. I once asked him, how come you're getting public traction in the cycle world where many other psychoanalysts don't? And he said, it's because I have a mechanism, I have an engine, which is the generational idea, right? So that's an idea that people can understand and say, oh, that kind of makes sense. But I think it's So it's partly why I'm very excited to learn more about your work, because I think you are looking at some mechanisms that could explain some of the things that we see in wildlife biology. And just briefly, maybe I'll share this before you get started. This here is the proceedings of the Matamec Conference on Biological Cycles. Have you ever heard of this before?
Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with this one.
So this happened in the 1920s, and it was one of the things that later inspired Edward Dewey, the author of the Cycles book over here and the founder of the Foundation for the Study of Cycles. But this conference in Canada was organized by a man named Copley Amory, who was the first chairman of the Foundation for the Study of Cycles. And it was up in Canada. Ellsworth Huntington was from Yale University. He kind of oversaw the report, but it's quite a fascinating. This happened in the 1920s, or 1931, excuse me, was the in July 1931 this conference took place. And I bet if you're familiar with some of the wildlife biologists, there's a lot of interesting names in here. But one thing I wanted to get to here, that the little bit I've looked into your work, I think you'll find it interesting, and we'll get there in just a minute. But this was in 1931. Most of the members of the conference expected that the sunspot cycle of 11.2 years would figure prominently at Metamac. But long story short, they found that it was more of a 9 to 10 year cycle than an 11 to 12 year cycle. And one curious thing about this 9 or 10 year cycle is that while it can be detected in meteorological records, it has not been much studied there. Dr. Delury pointed out that it is a little longer than the lunar cycle of 8.85 years and almost exactly half of another lunar cycle of 18.6 years.
That's right.
So this was in 1931, right? And let me just get down to the, some of the Thornton W. Burgess. Have you heard of him? The author of the children's books on wildlife.
Yes.
Was in attendance at the conference. A number of prominent wildlife biologists. And it's been, fascinating to me how well supported this work was back in the 30s and really and in the 40s. And then since then, you really just haven't heard that much about it, or at least I haven't heard that much about
No.
it.
Yeah, it went quiet
But
in the 1970s, I'd figure.
yes. So, but look at, Thornton Burgess, Charles Campsell, a lot of famous biologists in here that were in attendance. Charles Sutherland Elton, Ellsworth Huntington, of course. So, yeah, so this is a big part of the history of the Foundation for the Study of Cycles. And so, without further ado, I would love to turn it over to you and have you share your screen and talk a little bit about your work.
Right. Well, thank you. And thank you for the introduction
Yes.
here. Actually, now that I think of it, the conference does ring a bell. I've heard of it. I came across it. There wasn't too many facts. I actually tried to find more articles on the conference, but they couldn't be found. So there
Yes.
were
Well, I have a full copy of the proceedings of the conference.
excellent. I would be very
So I'd be
interested in
happy
that.
to share them with you.
Great. So let's see. Well, yeah, like I said, I read the book The Fourth Turning in 2017, and after that, I thought about I could take this in a chronological order to explain how I got this all started. This project started. For about 6 months, I thought about the Strauss-Howe cycle, which is a four-part cycle. I guess you have talked about it on your channel before.
Yes.
So I hope your listeners are familiar with it just a little bit, at least. If not, I suggest that you can go on Wikipedia or elsewhere to get a brief glimpse of the idea. But in any case, it's a 4-phase cycle, and it consists of 4 generations. Each are about 20 years in length. Some
Mhm.
cycles have been 90 years, some 100 years, but let's say the 80-year cycle is the norm here.
Yes.
So I thought about it, and I was very skeptical about the book's ideas of the cycle being driven somehow by social dynamics, generational dynamics, and after that, what happens in the world during
Mhm.
one cycle. And on the other hand, I found that the theories, predictions about the events that unfolded in the 2010s were very accurate. And on the other hand, the generational constellation and what it means, that how each generation gets older, like that the generation Z would be very sensitive. That came true.
Mhm.
I don't think anyone can deny that. So at that point, I was looking into my research into one master's degree article, and I was looking at hormone levels for dogs, and it came to me that maybe hormone levels had something to do with the Strauss-House cycle, because each generation has these quite specific behavioral traits
Mhm.
from childhood to elderhood.
Yes.
And at that moment, I began to construct a kind of a cycle, hormone cycle that would last 80 years. So I won't go into the details too much here, but there were some hints in the Strauss-House cycle about how the social mood also changes. So I went with that, and I thought about the main hormones of human behavior, which are dopamine. Dopamine basically it um, modulates a ton of stuff, but for sake of keeping this as simple as possible, I would say that fear and confidence, that axis is one very important, and there are other things too, like feelings of loneliness. And dopamine levels are working in a way that when you have a lot of dopamine, you tend to get fearful, and when you have a little dopamine, you are confident, self-confident, and have a positive outlook.
Mhm.
So this is one of the things that oscillates in the Strauss-Howe generational theory. So at the beginning of the cycle, there is kind of lots of fear. After 4 years, when the oscillation of the confidence axis goes down, you have positive feelings about today, about the future, and then again 40 years you get fearful behavior. The social mood is fearful.
Mhm.
And
Right.
the same thing goes for loneliness. That's at the end
Mhm.
and the beginning of the cycle, people feel lonelier, but at the middle of the cycle, they don't feel as lonely. So that's how I made this first model of the Strauss-Howe generational cycle, but depicted as hormone levels. So it begins with maximum levels of dopamine. This would mean that there is fearful behavior and people feel lonelier than normal. This
Is
would
that
be
the present
right.
time, the fourth turning, so to speak?
This is the first turning here,
The first turning,
right?
okay.
So let's
So
say
kind
this
of
is
after the crisis,
yeah.
rebuilding.
So this would be in Strauss-Howe theory. This would be about 1947. In about 40 years, in closer to 1990, uh,
Mm.
the dopamine levels would go down and
Mhm.
then again up. This would be closer to 2030. Okay,
Mhm.
so then after that, I thought about sex hormone levels. They also affect behavior very much, and but also sexual behavior, well, and sexual maturation, and also cortisol levels. They also affect behavior, and growth hormone level is basically inverse to the dopamine level because dopamine suppresses growth hormone. And I won't go into detail on all of the behavior effects of these hormones, but this, in any case, this was kind of the first model I made based on the Strauss-Howe
And so,
international.
based on
Right.
the known um, expressions of these hormones, you felt that uh, these intensity levels in different generations did express something about the Strauss-Howe 4 generations.
Yes, yes.
Interesting.
This depicts basically the social mood that it's
Mm-hmm.
constantly changing throughout the decades. But
Mm-hmm.
in addition, when you think about cohort born in, let's say, 1940, they would
Mm-hmm.
be about 7 years old in, well, 1947, and
Mm-hmm.
this would mean that they would be affected by dopamine levels in their youth, high dopamine levels. This
Mm-hmm.
would kind of imprint a certain type of personality into them.
Mm-hmm.
And as they grow older, well, after, let's say, 30 years, the brain isn't affected by hormone levels as much because it kind of finishes development. There is some brain plasticity after that also, but the main developmental time is between 1 and 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, from birth, and that's how I thought about this
Mm-hmm. Very
hormonal
interesting.
representation.
Yes.
And after that, I tried to do a model, kind of epigenetic model, that maybe there could be something between generations, kind of dynamics that could create this kind of hormone oscillation that would last about 80 years to 100 years. And for 1 year, I really tried hard to make it work, but I realized that it can't work. And I, after I had given up in 2019 on trying to make it work, I, by mistake, ran into animal population cycles, which is something you know also about.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found out this is that although we are all taught in high school that animal population cycles, periodic animal population cycles last for about 3 to 5 years for lemmings and voles and other small mammals, and roughly 8 to 11 years for hare and grouse. And let's see what others we have. Well, moose have really long population cycles lasting from about 25 years to 65 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I found out that there had been an article released in the past year that said that in reality, none of the explanations that were laid out in the 1920s, which is when the cycle studies really started on, it's although we've been told that they have been solved, we know that it would be the predator prey kind of modelings and or something else, pathogens or
Mm-hmm.
something else in the nature. But in reality, nothing has been proven, and all of the
Mm-hmm.
hypotheses have been disproven basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started looking into the hormone levels because there have been a lot of measurements that have been done during this repeating repeating cycles in nature. And what I found out was that the animal population cycles basically follow this very model that I had made for human populations that would last 80 years. But for wolves, it's for 4 years. So
Mm-hmm.
they have a population boom first, and they are very, well, typically larger. which is the growth hormone here. First, there's
Hmm.
a population boom, they grow larger, but then something happens and they start to die off. So here in the third phase, you see that fecundity goes down and cortisol levels go up. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, in one study, they found out that the animals have diabetes at this point. Probably
Cortisol
caused by
is not
cortisol.
a healthy hormone, right? I mean,
Basically not. Yes, it's
associated
very
with
nasty.
stress and anxiety and
Right, right. And what happens in nature that the animals have this kind of migration wave in the middle of their cycle, and then the migration wave goes off. But in any case, it seems that all of the same uh, hormone level oscillations happen in the same four-phase sequence. If it's a 4-year wool cycle or a 9-year hair cycle or a 30-year moose cycle. And that was quite the coincidence, I
yes.
thought. So after
So
that, I've been
if
hard on
I
this,
may
working on,
summarize
right?
to see if I have this right. So the sex hormones kind of start the cycle. The population grows. Uh, then the next phase is that population gets physically larger
Right.
with the growth hormones. And then it kind of reaches a peak of growth, let's say, and then it starts to get stressed and anxious and less fertile, and then it kind of crashes and starts over.
Exactly, exactly.
Interesting.
And here is some more graphical presentation of what happens. So if the conditions in the nature aren't too good, the population isn't cyclical, or if the habitat is very patchy, so not too many animals are living
Ah,
close to each other. But once a
fascinating.
certain threshold is reached and there are enough resources, this cyclicity ensues, and
Mm-hmm.
that's when you get those phases you just told me.
Mm-hmm.
So you have growth, burst, kind of called often boom, and then you have when you have lots of animals, they are big, they begin their migration. It's optimal time for migration, and
Mm-hmm.
once they have completed basically the migration, uh, the number of the animals crashes, and then there is a low phase when the animals are very fearful and there are very few of them. And
Interesting.
the other very interesting thing is that hasn't been explained anywhere by anyone. Weather patterns and something like that have been suggested as early as 1920s, but nothing has come up. The thing is that this cyclicity can be synchronous across hundreds or thousands of populations that live across thousands of square miles.
Of different species or of the
Uh,
same
the
species?
same species, but
Mm-hmm. Different.
the cycles can synchronize between similar species, like
Mm-hmm.
lemmings and moles, if they're
Mm-hmm.
living in the same habitat, which
Mm-hmm.
also hints at a hormonal synchronization mechanism.
Very interesting. So these predator prey cycles or predator prey explanations. So I did my doctoral work in systems science and complexity studies, right? And we heard a lot about predator prey
Mm,
relationships,
yeah,
right? But are you
very
saying
famous.
that predator prey is not actually a good explanation for the cycles that we see, population cycles?
Yes, yes, it's quite bad. The explanation isn't sufficient in any way, and
Mm-hmm.
actually there have been more articles in the last 5 years or so that have stated this. And
Interesting.
the best explanation or example I could give you is that there have been studies that have been they have closed off these certain, they have these closed enclosures on, let's say, vole habitats, and so the holes in the nets are so small that predators cannot enter the habitat. So, but still the cycles go on. There are just a little bit more animals, sure, because predators can't eat them,
Hmm.
but the cycles continue in the same way. The same thing happens on islands where there are no really real predators that could threat the population. The cycles still go on, and the same thing is true for food addition. It doesn't, food availability doesn't affect too much. If you have more food, then the cycles go at a kind of a higher level, but
So it
nothing else
affects
changes.
amplitude, but not
Yeah,
phase.
right. And there is the
Wow.
grass phase. It's, well, not as many animals die of if you add food, but that's to be expected.
So you've actually these hormone levels have been measured, and this is verified data at this point.
Yes, I've written a lengthy hypothesis on this subject. It's
Hmm.
called cyclical metapopulation mechanism, and here I have all the material on the animal population cycles as well as the human cycles. So anyone can go here and check, and I have a lengthy introduction here.
Great.
And let's
Well,
see, I'll go a little bit lower, and here are the studies that show that pretty much
mhm.
everything points to the oscillations being like I have put them in the original model. So for example, here are sex hormones, and they have tested weight of gonads and sexual maturity during the cycle, and it points that the weight of gonads is larger at the beginning of the cycle and smaller at the end of the cycle, and same thing goes for sexual maturity. And there are lots of studies showing that these oscillations are in fact pretty accurate for each species. Like I stated before, it's the only thing that changes is the length, the period of the cycle. So this can be either for 4 years or much longer cycle, but the sequence is always the same.
So did you eventually find some validation that this was also at work in the Strauss-Howe cycles?
Yes, yes, because if I had first found these hormonal changes in the cyclical, periodic cyclical animal populations, constructed a model after that, and then found the Strauss-Howe cycle, generational theory, and its cycle, I would be much more suspicious. But like I stated, I first found Strauss-Howe generational theory, and I contacted Neil Howe first time. I think it was late 2018 or something about
Hmm.
my hypothesis, and only after that, in 2019, did I discover that these same hormonal changes are. It looks like they're generating the animal population cycles in nature.
That's quite a impressive that you put together that analysis based on a theory, and then you actually found it to be validated by the data after the fact.
Right, right.
Wonderful. Well, can you share with us a little more of what you found?
Yes.
The larch bud moth. I did look at this, some of this content briefly. So yeah, I'd love to continue to learn more about what you found.
All right. And if I go too much into biology, just please tell me, because I don't want to bore your listeners too much with this stuff.
Sure.
But it's very integral to this hypothesis, the biological roots. of this animal population cycles. So, well, maybe I will skip the animal population cycles for now and go into human populations. So
And
after making the model, I also started to think that what kind of statistics could prove that these hormone level changes, these very long 80-year oscillations, would be occurring in human populations. And I obviously first thought about the US population, and but and I thought about the sex hormone level first going up and then going down. And this is the oscillation I made. It's a little bit more delicate than the squared oscillation in the animal model or in the first human model, but it's very close. It looks like this. And there's also an oxytocin oscillation added. It is reverse to sex hormone, the sex hormone oscillation. This might seem a little bit complicated right now, but I'll get back to all of this in a little while. So
okay.
that's basically the only thing that's changed from the original model. It's a little bit more precise. The dopamine oscillation here, cortisol and growth hormone are still the same. Okay, so I found out that the US population, the fertility rate in the US has a certain curve that looks very much like an oscillation here. It kind of follows this curve. Statistics begin in 1940, and here we can see the effect of World War II. It's kind of a little bit shock downwards,
The
then
baby boom.
upwards. Yeah. The baby boom began actually in the 1940s, more like, and it had begun in 1950, and then it peaked in 1958, and then came down. And I know there have been some studies on this that claim that maybe contraceptives or something else caused this baby boom or post-war positive attitudes. But the fact that the boom began before the war, basically, and contraceptives cannot explain it either.
Can
There have been,
contraceptives explain the decline in
yeah,
the
the thing is that there have been studies that have looked at contraceptive availability in different states in the US. So they came readily available probably in the eastern states first, something like that, and the mid south later on. I don't remember correctly everything, the details here, but they looked at it and said that the contraceptive availability didn't affect much here. And if you think that post-war boom would be another thing about against that, would be that after World War One there was no population boom. So if you have an explanation, it should possibly work elsewhere too. And after making that curve, I found out that Canada has a very similar curve. It also begins increasing in the 1940s, early 1940s, then it goes up and peaks very close to 1958, and then it goes down. And then I started looking at other countries too. Here is Australia, and it peaks just a few years later than in the US and Canada. So this is like 1960, something like that, 61. And the same thing is true for the European countries. So you have a simultaneous baby boom and a crash, and there aren't really great explanations for it. And at the same time, the other statistic that supports this idea that sex hormone levels would be peaking in close to 1960 is the average age statistics. The average age statistics, everyone knows that it has gone up since the 1970s. But what people don't realize that it went down before the 1970s.
Hmm.
You always see the statistic that kind of cuts off in the 1970s
Mm-hmm.
and then goes
Mm-hmm.
up. And there
Mm-hmm.
are very good, let's say, logical explanations for this, like women joined the workforce and they went studying, and those are the two very popular explanations.
Mm-hmm.
But if that, that is the case, why did it go
Right.
down in here statistics? It was like this in the US. In
Mm-hmm.
Britain, it hit nadir in early 1970s. Canada, same thing, went down and then up. And this is Australia. It went down and hit nadir in about 1970, then went up. Denmark, same thing. Here is France, same thing. Netherlands, same thing. It's it's like that. There is this kind of oscillation that repeats within just 5 years. It goes down and then it goes up,
Mm-hmm.
and there is no good explanation for this. And
Mm-hmm.
how this my hypothesis explains this is very simple. So let me find the right picture. So the idea is that if the sex hormone oscillation among Western countries peaked in about 1960, it would mean that teenagers during this era, which is when the sexual maturation is at its peak, fastest rate, they would be developing uh, their sexual maturity the fastest. This would mean that if you are about 14 in 1960, in whether it is the US, Australia, or Netherlands, it would mean that you will have children earlier because you have higher sex hormone levels. You will have children earlier than other cohorts.
Okay.
And
Mm-hmm.
this came true about 10 years later,
Mm-hmm.
when these cohorts that were in their teens in 1960, close to
Mm-hmm.
it, roughly 10 years later, they hit the nadir in maternal age and paternal age.
Mm-hmm.
And these statistics repeat in basically every Western country.
Mm-hmm.
And this sex hormone oscillation explains that.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can go on, here I could give another explanation that would explain the cortisol oscillation.
Please do.
Right. So let's go back to the cortisol oscillation. So the model says that it was at average levels approximately in, let's say, 1950. Then it hit nadir in 1970. Then it peaked in 2020, and after that it has been going down.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time I thought that could be some proxy statistic that would explain, show this increase in cortisol levels, and then it's going down after about 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that there is one autoimmune disease that is very prevalent in the Western countries, and that is obviously type 2 diabetes. And cortisol is very much linked to it, because if you have constantly high cortisol levels, you can develop type 2 diabetes,
Mm-hmm.
because it begins attacking the body's own cells. Uh, I don't remember the uh, exact English words for how it goes, but in any case, I thought that what about type 2 diabetes incidence? That there could be some kind of a peak in incidence close to
Mm-hmm.
2010 if this
Mm-hmm.
oscillation was true.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started digging up, and I found that here is the US figure. Type 2 diabetes went up. It started climbing in 1990, roughly, early 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
It went up. It peaked in 2000, roughly 2009, and after that it has been going down. Nobody knows why.
Hmm.
And here is a statistic from the US Armed Forces that shows that it was in 2010 there. Before that it went up, and after that it has gone down. And here is from Finland a statistics that shows the same thing. Early 2000s it went up, and after that it has been going down. And there is no explanation here, and it's very counterintuitive to see these statistics that nobody actually talks about these days, because nobody knows the explanation why the incidence rates for type 2 diabetes have been going down after about 2010, because people are weighing more, people are moving less.
Hmm.
It's
Right.
pretty
If you had
obvious
asked
it should
me,
be going up still, but
if
there
you
was a
had asked
peak.
me anecdotally, I would have assumed that it was still going up.
Right, me too.
Right. The
I,
media coverage certainly would lead one to believe that it's getting worse.
yes,
Hmm.
yes.
So
And
very interesting.
right, here are some few more statistics on that. Here is, for example, well, this is the US updated. It's about 2008, 2009 was the peak, and
Mm-hmm.
after that it has been going down. And the
Mm-hmm.
changes are quite radical, because
Mm-hmm.
if you had eight individuals per thousand getting type 2 diabetes over 8, this is like
Yes.
8.5 or something, now it's below 6. And there have been a couple of studies looking at this international phenomenon, but no explanations have been found why this is happening in any of the countries. And because it is synchronous, it's quite
Right.
obvious that there has to be some kind of a common denominator here at work.
Hmm. So it's you're saying it's not likely diet.
No, and well, this statistics from Denmark is a pretty good one, because it shows that the same thing with the incidence happened in each of the age groups,
Ooh.
basically
Huh.
in the same year.
This is amazing work, Janne. Amazing. And it's amazing to me that you seem to be doing this as a hobby.
Right, kind of. Well,
Right? You're studying law from what you told me.
yes, yes. Well, those studies have been on pause for some time now, because I
Mm-hmm.
spent most of my time on this. And I've
I'm
also
glad to hear it.
in 2020, late 2020, I went to a university professor of aquatic ecology, and suggested that the animal populations could be driven by this kind of a hormone cycle, multi-annual hormone cycle. And he was a little bit skeptical, but he agreed that we could work towards together uh, towards a manuscript that this would be happening. And a few years after that, I contacted a chronobiologist here in Finland, because chronobiology, which is the study
Yeah.
of biological functions in relation to time, basically. And
Yes.
he also agreed that he would help me with this
Fantastic.
with this project.
Chronobiology is a field that I would like there to be much more represented in the cycles community.
Right, it's a pretty novel field, and there have been major discoveries during the past 10 years, past
Mm-hmm.
15 years, and it's kind of picking up. But there are some very difficult unanswered questions, like a very basic question of how the brain interprets the light, darkness, and other cycles that happen in nature, and transforms them into hormone level oscillations. There isn't we still don't know why it is happening.
Hmm.
That is one of the reasons that it's been a kind of difficult field to working, and there aren't too many
Mm-hmm.
chronobiologists at the
Mm-hmm.
moment, even though it's obvious that it affects disease and other important fields uh, connected to biology and medicine. But it's a new field still.
Mm-hmm. Is there more that you would like to show from this
Well,
study?
I could quickly show a little bit about the uh, oxytocin oscillation, because this is something that Strauss-Howe noticed, had a very clear oscillation throughout the 80-year cycle. And I don't have the years here, but it basically goes that during the fourth turning, or let's start from the first turning, which would be about 1950, it would mean that the type of nurture would be, and forgive me if I use wrong terms here, but I'm talking about parenting intensity and a little bit about how much parents are typically spending time with the children and how careful they are with the children. You have
Mm-hmm.
discussed this with Neil previously,
Mm-hmm.
so but that's
Yes.
the idea that this would be 1950. So parenting intensity would be going down during the first turning. Then it would be, we'll jump to the second. This picture is from Generations, their book from 91.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
added these turnings and a little bit more info. During the second turning, parenting intensity
Mm-hmm.
would hit an nadir. This would be roughly 1970. And after that, it would pick up and peak during the fourth turning.
Right now.
Yes, and that would be roughly 2015, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the model. And I thought about oxytocin, what kind of proxy statistics could reveal oxytocin levels in Western countries. And I thought about breastfeeding, because that is oxytocin enables breastfeeding, first of all. So if you have
Mm-hmm.
very little oxytocin levels, you cannot breastfeed, and if you need higher levels, so you can breastfeed. And it, like other hormones, it has physiological and behavioral parts to it.
Mm-hmm.
So then I looked at breastfeeding statistics, and I found out that indeed breastfeeding statistics show that breastfeeding levels were at the lowest during the 1970s and peaked up
Mm-hmm.
after that, and possibly peaked close to 2010. The
Mm.
statistics today could be a little bit corrupted by the fact that in hospitals today, if a mother of a newborn cannot breastfeed, they typically can give them oxytocin, these nasal sprays, which enables
Mm-hmm.
them to breastfeed. But
Mm.
it's not that common today because most women do breastfeed. But in any
Mm-hmm.
case, um, this is, I believe, this is from the US, this first statistic. This is a more accurate statistic from the US. It shows from all the way from early 20th century. It was, the statistics show that breastfeeding rates were high. Then it went down and hit nadir in about 1970, and after that climbed up. And this is another statistic that nobody has a good explanation for it, why this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And here is the same in Australia. Breastfeeding statistics, it shows that they were high in the 1950s,
Wow.
low in 1970s, and then went up. And
Fantastic.
yeah, and here is Sweden. They were high, they went down, and in the 1970s hit nadir and then went up. Here is
Mm.
from New Zealand. It's really difficult to see, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like 1960, 69, 68,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and a few more from Norway. Same thing here. about 1970. It's Nadir and Japan also, which I don't have many statistics from, but I found it curious that they too had the same thing happening. And let's
Hmm.
see, this is from the UK. Same thing. They were high, hit nadir in the early 70s, and then went up. So we have this all kinds of phenomenon that don't have any explanation happening basically synchronous across human populations, and it's the very same thing that seems to be happening in among periodic cyclic animal populations as well. The center place seems to be US because it's basically the first or among the first where these changes in trends happen. And Europe, it's UK, Western Europe is about 2 to 4 years behind it. Same thing for Scandinavia. Then you go to Central Europe and Southern Europe, the lag can grow to be as big as, say, 5 years. But still, it's within a very tight period of a few years only. So,
Absolutely fascinating, Jana. Fascinating.
yeah,
Very well done. Um, what I'm interested, so you've studied some animal populations, you've studied human populations. I've seen you mention kind of a 4-year cycle in voles and lemmings, and a 9.3-year cycle in moths, and an 80-year cycle in the Strauss Howe kind of human being. Um, what uh, I'm interested in what cycles you're seeing, commonly across different populations.
uh, what do you mean? What kind of cycles do
And
you?
in terms of lengths, are you seeing 9.3-year cycles in lots of different populations, or 3.7-year pop cycles in lots of different populations?
We're talking about human populations here.
No, I'm
Oh,
talking about any
right, right,
animal population,
right. So,
just population cycles in general.
right. So this is the area that we're working on right now,
Hmm.
especially me, and I'm consulting the chronobiologists here. And there are, like you talked about, discussed on your channel, there are these lunar cycles and solar cycles that are
Hmm.
clearly, we know today, not like in um, 1920s. We knew very little about these things, but
Hmm.
still we knew something. And
Yeah.
and today it looks like the lunar nodal cycle has the most significant effect on animal population cycles. It
Hmm.
looks like there are several different taxa that are using the lunar nodal cycle as a kind of a Z-Geber, a timekeeping mechanism,
Hmm.
synchronization device for their cycle.
Hmm.
Because, for example, I could go back to the first picture here.
Hmm.
This shows the bud moth cycle in the
Right.
Alps, which went for over 1,200 years, basically continuously. And this shows the relations between the Budmoth cycle and the lunar nodal cycle here. This is work done by Herb Archibald, and he has drawn this
Uh,
very beautiful cycle. The blue cycle is the lunar
hmm.
nodal cycle, and
Hmm.
the red one is the Budmoth cycle.
Hmm.
And the relation between the population cycles and the lunar cycles isn't always this clear, but
Yeah.
it's like the paper you discussed and the seminar you discussed from 1931. they knew that there were many species that had very similar periods for their
Yeah.
population cycles.
And they basically highlighted the 9 to 10 year cycle back then.
Right, right.
But they said there was no meteorological explanation. They did
Yes,
note that it was half of the lunar nodal cycle.
right. So it's there have been some biologists who have suggested this before. There,
Hmm.
in 1950s, and actually Herb Archibald began his work in the 1970s, and he noticed this, and now much later on he has come back to this subject during his retirement days because he noticed that there are more connections. He has also connected this kind of a spring tide cycle, which happens, yeah, peaks every 3.8 years. And
What is the spring tide cycle? Is that?
it's a, how would I say it? It's a physical cycle that it it's kind of a, there are these different signals that the moon and the sun cause to the tides
Hmm.
on on planet Earth, and they kind of align every 3.8 years. This
So they
isn't,
sync up every 3.8 years and
yeah,
kind of
this
have
is
their
the only
maximum.
alignment, but it causes this kind of a tide cycle that peaks every 3.8 years.
Hmm. Okay.
And of course, there is also the solar activity cycle that you have discussed on your
Sure.
channel before. But the thing is that it's basically one study on porcupine shows that there seems to be a close link. But at the moment,
Hmm.
that is the only one that would point to a clear solar activity cycle connection.
Hmm.
And there are some indications that crabs and shrimp could be also connected to the solar, or their population cycles would be connected to the solar activity cycle, but there needs to be more evidence of this.
Hmm.
So I know this is a lot to take in, but
Oh, I love it, Anna. It's fantastic. So I am thrilled to be learning about your work. What I'm hearing, so you mentioned before, like in chronobiology, how there's no known mechanism for how like signals of day and night, or light,
mm,
produce hormone changes, right?
right,
And similarly here, I'm guessing like we can say, wow, all these uh, population cycles line up with the lunar nodal cycle or a half lunar nodal cycle, but we really don't have any explanation as to why, how that cycle would be, what mechanism it would be impacting and influencing these populations.
right, right. But it's very clear that
Yeah.
let's say we can use birds as an example
Hmm.
here, because the thing is that with birds you have well, migratory birds, you have a basically 1 year cycle. uh, the birds migrate in the spring and in the autumn, and this has
In the
been
spring and
studied.
in the autumn.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So this has been studied for over 100 years. There have been
Hmm.
studies that let's see scientists have put the birds in enclosures, and they have kind of adjusted the annual light cycle to be, let's say, only 6 months, or in some cases even 3 months. So the bird's brain thinks that the
Hmm.
annual cycle is only 6 months long.
Okay. Hmm.
This causes the animal to migrate 4 times a year. And before this light cycle gives kind of a definite period, it there are these sequences in the migratory birds annual cycle that they before they migrate they typically gather more fat, which points to cortisol levels being higher. We all know that with cortisol uh, you store more fat.
Mm-hmm.
So there are this the sequence stays the same, but it's just the period that changes.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that
Mm-hmm.
animals they sense these light changes and also changes in gravity and possibly other things too, and they adjust to certain signals, and those signals, those periodic signals, they drive the hormone level oscillations, which in part drive behavior, oscillation behavior throughout the
Mm-hmm.
year, for example with
Mm-hmm.
the migratory birds.
Mm-hmm. I have a son who's very interested in birds, so we have watched a lot of information about birds and read a lot of information about birds. And some of the migration patterns are just inconceivable. You know, the preciseness of it and the repetitiveness of it
Right.
are astonishing. And
Yes,
and
yes.
and it's clear that there really isn't a well understood explanation for it at this point yet.
Right. There have been several studies conducted recently, and they're all the time understanding more and more about how the mechanism works. And it appears that there is this kind of programming, genetic programming, that is has a, it's a sequential behavioral and physiological program. And basically, the only thing that can enact this program are hormone levels that oscillate throughout the period.
Mm-hmm.
And I can give you another example, is which is fascinating. It's a monarch butterflies. That
Right.
if I there is a Wikipedia
Yeah.
article on this that is very thorough and very nice. It has
Mm-hmm.
nice pictures on it. It shows that the I guess the uh, in let's start from spring, which is when they begin their migration from roughly from I guess it's northern Mexico, and they begin flying towards the border of Canada. They reach
Are
it.
Were you sharing something on your screen, Jana?
No, not on this,
Okay.
not on this. Yeah,
Okay.
but they go to. They spend about 3 generations. They take a slow trip to the border of Canada. Let's
Mm-hmm.
put it this way.
Right.
And once it after 3 or 4 generations, it comes time. It is fall. It is time to migrate back to Mexico, where it is warm. The last
Yes.
generation of the annual cycle for the monarch butterflies flies all the way from about the border of Canada to the border of Mexico, and that
Yes.
generation lives about 4 times longer than
Mm-hmm.
the previous generations,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty phenomenal.
It is
If it
phenomenal.
was a human generation, they would live to be
Yeah.
about 300 to 400 years old.
Right. Right. It is lots of mysteries yet to be solved, huh?
Yeah, yeah, it is, but there are a lot of mechanisms that are pretty well understood today. So
Mm-hmm.
there isn't too much to find out other than how it works in each species.
So, have you looked to see if these cycles are observed in any other human systems, like, say, financial systems?
Well, I think that the Strauss-Howe generational theory points to there being some kind of a there typically is some kind of a big financial crisis between the third and the fourth churning.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at that, and that is the point when cortisol levels here,
Mm-hmm.
if you can see this. Let's see. Okay, maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. So
Mm-hmm.
this would be about 1970 here.
Okay.
Sorry, 2010 here. And there are studies that indicate that cortisol does indeed increase risk taking in humans.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting.
Right. So that is kind of the one indicator that I've seen. And obviously, 2008, 2009, we had the financial crisis
Mm-hmm.
in which
Right.
it at least began with too much risk taking in the US with the
Mm-hmm.
subprime mortgages. And there are other areas, obviously, with risk taking that is too high, but their theory says that this is the moment when
Mm-hmm.
this tends to
Interesting.
happen. And cortisol would be definitely a good explanation for it.
Very interesting.
And but when you think about financial markets, I think that fear and confidence, that axis is possibly more important than risk taking. And
There's
especially,
certainly been a lot of coverage about dopamine in the media over the past 10 years or so. Even in the last couple of years, there was a book out called Dopamine Nation in the United States, right? Talking about gambling behaviors and in general, dopamine as a mechanism for, excuse me, just a second, dopamine as a mechanism for uh, that is manipulate or a hormone that is manipulated by social media, right?
right.
So
Well,
it does seem that we are in a time of elevated dopamine, certainly in my lifetime.
right. Yeah. And high dopamine levels are also high or very low are typical for ADHD also.
Interesting.
And and feelings of loneliness. We seem
It's
to be
going around
having
a
a
lot right now.
loneliness epidemic. Yeah. And well, if I
There's
can
also a lot
go
of
into one more example,
sure.
it's there has been a lot of discussion about there being a youth mental health epidemic.
Yes.
So that began around 2010, and most of the blame has been assigned to social media, the
And
internet,
mobile phones and
yeah, yeah, stuff like
mhm.
that. And Jonathan Haidt has published this very uh,
Yeah, I'm familiar with
well-known
his
book,
work.
right? Anxious Generation. And
Hmm.
in it, he said that it is the social media, this kind of rewiring of the brain of today's youth that is caused by social media and
Hmm.
smartphones that have quick internet access. And he
Hmm.
laid out several statistics that would support this. But
Yes.
his suggestions are unfortunately a little bit flawed because uh, there have been hundreds of studies published on the possible connection between social media, internet,
Hmm.
smartphones, and
Hmm.
youth mental health. And they don't really support the idea that social media is causing all these problems and that technology is causing all the problems. They have found that, sure, there is some kind of connection,
Correlation.
yeah, but then again, there's also connection between individuals that look all day long at soap operas, and certainly it looks like that the connection is stronger with social media and mental health issues, but not too much. not too
Mm-hmm.
much.
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking at this thing about 2 years ago, and let's see where I have it here. So with dopamine oscillation, going back to it, it hit nadir in about 1990, and
Mm-hmm.
here we have the average line after which it has been going towards the top, which would be
Mm-hmm.
around 2030. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then I looked
Mm-hmm.
at the statistics that Haidt provided on his
Mm-hmm.
Substack, and I realized that this the dopamine oscillation would be a very good fit here also.
Mm-hmm.
Because in 2010 approximately, when it would go over the average line, that is when all the problems began.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So basically, first for girls, then for boys, although liberal girls were affected before conservative girls. But in any case, this is self derogation, and it was very flat before 2010 and then went up.
What
And
what is what
right,
is self-derogation?
it's basically talking badly about in a
Okay,
negative fashion
like
about thinking,
self-criticism.
yeah, self
Mm-hmm.
criticism, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this depressive episode
Mm-hmm.
statistic is a bit more descriptive,
Mm-hmm.
and that too began
Yeah.
increasing after 2011 in among the youth. So
So what you might say is that the dopamine level cycle is reaching its peak, and it's probably the dopamine levels that are driving the attachment to social media as
right,
opposed to social media causing the elevated dopamine levels.
right, exactly. And
Mm-hmm.
because if you have very high dopamine levels, you don't really want them to go much higher. But
Yeah.
you can think it like this, because social dopamine causes feelings of loneliness. If you're feeling lonely,
Mm-hmm.
you might want to go to social media to feel
Mm-hmm.
connected to other people.
Mm-hmm.
But
But it doesn't
so
really work very well.
no, no, not really. No, it's a little
Doesn't
bit.
give you the
If you're sad and you start drinking alcohol a lot, it makes you feel
right
a little bit better
sadder.
at first, but then
Yeah.
comes the crash. So
And
it's
then, like, you get into that. I know one of the elements of dopamine, and this is true in markets also, with behavioral finance, that you really long to get that dopamine hit, right? And kind of you sometimes, so like when it comes to markets and behavioral finance, uh, like when you're losing in markets, it's almost that you get more dopamine as your losses grow because you're anticipating the big relief that will come when you finally dig yourself out of the hole, right? So,
yes, possibly, quite possibly. The
hmm
thing is that you have to be very careful with dopamine.
hmm
There is a ton of misinformation on how it works.
mm,
So dopamine is basically the thing that when you're excited about something, dopamine levels kind of they begin to creep up,
hmm
and it's it it's kind of state of arousement in a way, a state of excitement when dopamine levels are going higher.
anticipation.
Yes, yes, dopamine levels go up in anticipation, and well, it's not really dopamine that gives you the reward. It takes you to the reward would be a little bit more accurate way of describing it. So it's
hmm
not really a feel good hormone, because
hmm
if you have way too little of it or way too much of it,
hmm
you don't feel good at all. So
hmm
there are a lot of misconceptions about it. So you have to be very careful. But what is known is these things that it causes loneliness and other symptoms like that. And that is one other thing that I don't have the statistics right here. I think, let's see if I have it, regarding the mental health epidemic among youth.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So with loneliness, it's the same thing. That this is the figure from the US,
Mm-hmm.
and that too began increasing around 2010. Okay, a little bit later, but I guess this is for let's see if this for high school or, well, any case in school. So
Mm-hmm.
that too boomed after 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that time spent with friends has been decreasing in the US since, well,
Yeah.
early 20th century. It has been going down, 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 down.
Yeah.
And obviously, it has also been going down after 2010. But the question is, when did the epidemic begin in around
Yeah.
2010? So that
Mm-hmm.
is one more uh, flaw in the social media technology explanation. It doesn't work
Mm-hmm.
very well,
Mm-hmm. Very good.
right?
Well, Gianna, uh, this has been a fantastic introduction to your work. I'm very interested in your work. I appreciate you sharing it very much. And I would love to continue the conversation and um, follow what you're doing and continue to learn more from you about what others are doing in this field as well. Because it's very important, as I said, in the beginning, like this does date back to the origin story of the Foundation for the Study of Cycles. We've largely ended up being more focused on in the financial world because that's largely what people value it for, right? But I do think getting at some of these deeper, more systemic issues and the hormonal, the potential of a uh, hormonal explanation of some of these cycles has always been intriguing. So I'm thrilled to have made this connection. Thank you, Neil, for introducing us. And I would love to continue to explore this with you in the weeks and months ahead.
Right. There is uh, one more addition I would like to say here is that
Please.
the thing that with dopamine is that it increases group cohesion. That is basically the most important connection between dopamine and the Strauss-Howe generational theory,
Mm-hmm.
because it's when dopamine levels are low, the groups are kind of stretched apart, and nobody follows the, well, nobody, but people don't follow the group rules, which was basically in the 1980s and 1990s. But now we are increasingly living in our own groups, and dopamine causes that basically on its own. It closes to groups, and when you have one or more groups that have opposing views on things, let's say the left and the right wing,
Mm-hmm.
men and women,
Mm-hmm.
different generations, any kinds of opposing groups,
Yeah.
they begin to clash because they
Yeah.
stretch apart in their opinions. They become more what they are innately, and that is the one thing that I didn't get here, because it's very very important when it comes to financial markets also, because well,
Mm-hmm.
I very very shortly explain this, that I've been constantly waiting that when these blocks between the east and west are forming, that is right now,
Mm-hmm.
and what kind of impact it will have on markets. And for example, last June, I wrote in the notes in my hypothesis that the tariffs are going to go higher,
Hmm.
because that is obviously what you do when you have disagreements with the other bloc, which is, well, the
Right.
East in
Yeah.
relation to West. And it has been, I've made some market predictions, not too accurate, but it's pretty clear to me it has been for a long time that defense is another segment that it has picked up recently.
Mhm.
And there
So
are these safe havens like gold and oil that I've predicted. It has been pretty clear that when the crisis mounts up and the tensions grow between the East and West, these are some of the commodities that may become very valuable. But
mhm.
like you said, this is a
So you
discussion for another time.
yes, and it sounds like you expect the conflict to increase for a few more years to come,
Absolutely.
maybe even into 2030.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if the cycle peaks in the US in, let's say, 2028, 2030, uh, it's likely that it will peak some 5 to 10 years later in the East, if the
Mm,
statistics from
mm.
Russia, for example, are correct. So
Finland is in an interesting
yes,
situation.
yes, yes, we are. Yes, we are. So,
Yes,
but in any case, the next 5 to 10 years are going to be a time of intensifying
conflict.
conflict between the East and the West. That is
Hmm.
quite clear, and it has been quite clear for the past decade also.
Very interesting. Jana, we're gathering in New York City in June of this year at a conference on cycles, the first in-person conference of the Foundation for the Study of Cycles in
Mm,
I think
interesting.
nearly 40 years. And yeah, we'd love to have you join us there if you think that might be of interest to you, because love to explore some of these themes. It's June 12th to the 14th in
Sounds good.
Manhattan. And we'd be delighted to have you there. We're doing one day, full day on science and 2 days on markets. And part of the foundation's work also is some technology that's basically kind of a Fourier spectral analysis for cycles detection
Right. I've used it also
across many.
a little
Is
bit.
that right? So,
Yep.
so you're familiar with our
Yes.
work a little bit already.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah. So we're going to be going more into depth, and then one of my aspirations for the foundation is that ultimately we can build a large database of all kinds of different phenomena, including population cycles, weather cycles, market cycles, and take advantage of much of the technology that's available today to try to see if we can see more deeply into some of these patterns.
Right. That sounds very interesting, and
Good.
I'd be happy to join.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we'll talk offline and make some arrangements. Thank you again, Jana. I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Bye bye.